Okay, I hope this is okay. I'm not sure. I just don't know how these things work. Okay. Alrighty. So again, we're looking generally at the mitzvahs that are connected to Yetzias Mitzrayim. We were looking last week at the pidyon Bechor, the redemption of pidyon haben. What's interesting is, just to finish up a little bit of a detail on that, generally speaking, we know that a firstborn child is considered to be sanctified until they are redeemed, because they became sanctified because they were saved by HaKadosh Baruch Hu in the miracle of Makas Bechoros, in which the firstborn of Egypt died, and the Israelites were spared, and that created, so to speak, a debt to God, which manifested itself in Kedusha, and the Kedusha needs a redemption, and that is the redemption of what is called pidyon haben. Now, it's interesting. What does it mean practically? What does it mean to say an unredeemed Bechor is kadosh? Does that have any implication at all? Of course, the HALACHA is very, very clear that if someone was not redeemed at day 31, you have to redeem him later, and he has to redeem himself later. I mean, it's much easier than... Pidyon haben at 30 is much easier than a bris at 30. That much is true. But in our Sameach, all the time, we have Bechors that have to have a pidyon haben and the like. So, of course, there's such a mitzvah. In fact, it's even brought down that the Vilna Gaon would give the pidyon haben money to every single Kohen he met during his life. He had a firstborn son, and the Vilna Gaon said, every Kohen is a doubtful Kohen. We don't know for sure if you're a Kohen. You know, Kohanim don't have the documentation, etc. When there's a Beis HaMikdash, the standards of evidence are going to be very, very high. Now, a guy shows up and says, I'm a Kohen, we give him an aliyah, okay. It's not, huh? Oh, so the Kohen gene, that's very interesting. The Kohen gene absolutely cannot prove anything, except it may negate kahuna, meaning it may be the absence of the gene. I mean, let me give you a very simple example. Let's imagine a male Kohen marries a non-Jewish woman. So not only is their son not a Kohen, their son is a goy. But since the male gene is passed through the father, so he'll have the gene. So this is what's called a false positive. The genetics test cannot establish kahuna, but it might negate kahuna, meaning the absence of it might show that somebody is not a Kohen. So the Vilna Gaon felt, of course that was before genetic testing, that he never knew if he had given the money to a Kohen. So in order to be sure he would be Yotzei the mitzvah, he gave it to every Kohen he met on the chance that perhaps he would get it right in that way. Now it is brought down that there are certain families in OUisrael that can trace their kahuna yichus all the way back. A Rappaport is actually a very famous example. The Rappaport family is said to be able to trace all the way back to Aaron without any problems in the middle. But my question simply is, if you are an unredeemed Bechor, what exactly is the holiness that you have? So fascinatingly, the Seporno says, because Seporno was not a posek, he was saying it as a matter of biblical commentary, that when the Torah says, Kadesh li kol Bechor, every Bechor is sanctified, it actually means an unredeemed Bechor is only allowed to do holy things, like learn Torah and mitzvos. He is not allowed to do profane work. So this is a very big incentive on parents to be Mekayim pidyon haben, because if you have a Bechor that is unredeemed, you cannot ask him to clean up his room or even do his limudei chol homework, because that is avodas chol. It's a very big chiddush. We do not paskin like the Seporno at all. We do not consider this to have any implication other than a certain spiritual holiness, but there is no limitation on what a firstborn Bechor can do. Now, what's interesting is pidyon haben is going to be the most relevant aspect of the holiness of a Bechor, but there are two other aspects that if you are a farmer you have to be aware of. The Torah sanctifies not only the human firstborn, the Torah sanctifies the animal firstborn, the cow, not the cow, but the male, the bull, the goat, the sheep, that they have Kedushat Bechor. Now here, there are some very, very practical implications. If I have a cow and a cow gives birth to a bull, which is its bechor, the first time it's given birth. That bechor, so it depends. If the bechor is an unblemished bechor, it has to be given to a kohen and will be sacrificed as a korban in the Beis HaMikdash that the kohen will eat, the meat. And even if the bechor has a blemish, it breaks a leg, so it cannot be sacrificed in the Beis HaMikdash. It must still be given to the kohen for the kohen to shecht for himself. Now, Bisman Hazeh, we don't have a Beis HaMikdash, so the truth of the matter is, this would create a great, great dilemma. If you're a farmer and your animal gives birth to a bechor, you are in big trouble. Now, if the bechor has a blemish, you give it to a kohen, and the kohen can have it shechted, and the kohen can even distribute the meat to aniyim and the like. That's if it has a blemish. But you're not allowed to make a blemish in a bechor. So you're stuck. If I have a bechor, number one, it's supposed to be a korban. There's no Beis HaMikdash. I'm not allowed to break its leg or even scratch it, so it would have a mum to be mutter. I'm not allowed to shear its wool if it's a sheep. I'm not allowed to milk it. Well, milk wouldn't be relevant. It's a male, but that's true anyway. But I'm not allowed to do work with it, and I'm not allowed to shear it. So it's a real, real problem. So the only thing the poskim tell me to do, if I'm stuck with that very, very difficult situation, is I'm allowed to scatter barbed wire throughout the yard, so to speak. So I can't make a mum, but I can create an obstacle in which there would be a mum. And then you give it to a kohen, and the kohen can have it shechted.
Give it back to you to eat?
Yes, he could. In other words, it doesn't have, it's not, once it has a mum, it doesn't have holiness. It just belongs to a kohen, and the kohen can actually give it back to OUisrael. Now, because of this, the poskim give us a very, very simple bit of advice. And that is, the first Mishnah in Maseches Bechoros says that any animal which is owned in partnership by a Jew and a non-Jew, the Vlad that is born from that animal does not have the sanctity of Bechor. So as a result, if you're a Jewish farmer, you're well advised, you have livestock, to sell the ear of your pregnant cow or goat or sheep to a non-Jew, be even a little tiny little part like an earlobe, and as a result, that will be mafkia, that will take away the holiness of the Bechor. Now, I know myself of a case in Baltimore where there was a couple that were not religious initially who had a petting zoo, with goats and sheep and, animals like that. And they had never heard about this thing about a Bechor, and they become religious, and all of a sudden they realize that some of their animals are technically a Bechor, and they were stuck because once it's born a Bechor with Kedusha, you don't have the eights of selling it to a guy. Selling it to a guy or selling part of it to a guy works only before the animal is born, and you sell part of the mother to a guy. So they were really, really stuck. And, it's very difficult, especially with a sheep, not to be able to shear a sheep. It's very uncomfortable for the sheep itself because it keeps on growing and growing. I'm not sure what wild sheep do exactly, how they get around that problem. But generally speaking, there's a Tsar Baalei Chayim issue, and if a sheep falls over and it's very loaded with wool, it won't even be able to get up again. So that's a difficult question. So I'm just telling you in advance, if any of you own livestock, be very, very careful to be sure that the females, before they give birth to their first child, male, you don't know, male or female, to sell an ear to the non-Jew. Now, there's one more aspect that's even more peculiar, and that is there is only one non-kosher animal that has the sanctity of Bechor, and that's a chamor, a donkey. Now here, the Torah gives you two choices, and we don't know all the reasons for this. One is either the donkey has to be killed, or the donkey can be redeemed by a sheep that you give to a Kohen. Now the sheep is not a korban. The sheep is the Kohen's property to be shechted, and once again, the Kohen can then give it back to Israel or give the meat that's stuck up, but the sheep has to be given to the Kohen. This is called pidyon, peter, chamor, the redemption of the petter, the one that opens the womb, the donkey. Now, this was a mitzvah that is not done very often, but it's experienced a bit of a renaissance in recent years as people are looking. Okay, you can question this. For example, Shiluach Hakan, looking for a bird to send away, has become very, very popular. And pidyon Peter Chamor is not as popular as Shiluach Hakan, but it's getting up there. In fact, I know a lawyer in Detroit, a firm lawyer in Detroit, that as a sideline, he arranges pidyon Peter Chamors throughout the United States because he knows about licensing and transporting livestock across state lines is not so pashut, but he kind of figures out how to do all of this. So if any of you are going to be in the States and you want to do a pidyon Peter Chamor, we could arrange it. And in Eretz Yisrael, it's also done. You could see it on YouTube and the like. In fact, the baby donkey really looked very, very cute. It was only a 30-day-old donkey. And they brought it into a base medrash, strangely enough. And it was wearing all sorts of fancy embroidered, blankets and the like. And the donkey was just looking around. It had a really interesting time, like, what on earth is going on? And they gave the sheep to a Kohen. The sheep was lifted by the Kohen, a lamb, and that was the pidyon Peter Chamor.
What do they do? What is this? If a person refuses, doesn't want to do that, do they do a refab bismanas?
Well, I've never heard of it, but the halacha is, The halacha is, if you don't want to be poda, you're mechuyev to be orif. Now, once again, you can avoid all of these halachos by simply selling. When the pregnant female is carrying baby, or even before, you sell the ear, and that's going to pater the whole business. So, be it as it may, the ins and the outs are not easy to understand. I'm asking to that. But nevertheless, it is very, very clear that the holiness of Bechor in all of its manifestations is a zecher to Yetzias Mitzrayim. It is to commemorate the Makas Bechoros, and therefore it is a mitzvah that connects us to Yetzias Mitzrayim. Yeah.
Is there any reason given for choosing a donkey of all the unkosher animals to...
Yeah, you're correct. I mean, donkey is obviously not a kosher animal, and it's the only non-kosher animal that has the potential to be a bechor. No other animal has that issue. In fact, even other kosher animals like deer, there's no din of bechor. It's only for cow, sheep, goats, and donkey. That's the only ones that you have. It's connected a little bit because just as the Torah says that no dog even wetted its tongue, no dog barked makas bechoros. Dogs normally sense the malach hamaves, and they were silent not to scare the Jewish people, and that's why there's actually a mitzvah when you have non-kosher meat to feed it to the dogs as reward. So donkeys, we have a similar thing. Donkeys tend to bray. They also have a sense of malach hamaves, and they were silent, so it's similar to the dog, that the donkey is honored, so to speak, with a certain holiness. Yeah, so why not the dog? You're right. In other words, they're honored in two different ways. You're correct. The dog is honored by getting the meat, and the donkey is honored by being redeemed. So you can question who gets the better deal there. I don't know. But the point is, both of them are sources of honor because they did not respond to the malach hamaves. By the way, a little thing about donkeys that one should know. Donkey, of course, is exemplary of the stubborn animal, right? Stubborn as a donkey. But the truth is, donkeys are not stubborn. Donkeys are very intelligent and they're very cautious. So because of this, they're more independent than horses. So if you tell a donkey to walk down a path, the donkey has to evaluate if it's safe. So the stubbornness is actually independent thinking. That might be a lesson to our own children, right? Your children are not always stubborn. Sometimes they're thinking things out, and that's actually a good quality. Okay, so what I want to talk about today, this was just finishing up. I wanted to talk about one other thing, halacha. People make a mistake. And this may be obvious, so forgive me if I'm just telling you the obvious. Pidyon haben is not the 30th day after birth. It is the 31st day after birth. That actually means 30 days must pass before you do pidyon haben. Now, some poskim even say it has to be 30 times 24 hours, meaning to say the following. If a child was born, let's say, 2 minutes before Shkia, you don't just count that as day one. You have to have 30 periods of 24 hours. So that might mean that even on day 31, you're not going to do the pidyon haben, in the morning. You're going to have to wait till 5:30 p.m. or whatever it is. That's called meyesh li'es. That is a chumrah, however. We do not require meyesh li'es. Some even say that by a bar mitzvah, by the way. They even say it has to be to the hour. We don't paskin that way, but we do paskin it has to be 30 days, and you cannot do the pidyon haben until day 31. So I bring this up because people have asked me shilas this week about scheduling a pidyon haben, and all of their questions were assuming pidyon haben is on day 30, which is actually not emes. It is day 31. Okay, but the next mitzvah I want to talk about is the mitzvah of tefillin. And what's interesting is, in Parshas Bo, tefillin and bechor are mentioned in juxtaposition twice. There is a parsha, Kadesh li kol bechor, sanctify every bechor, and then it mentions again, when Hashem brings you to the land, you shall sanctify the bechor. And in both of those parshios, back to back, we have a reference as well to tefillin, and of course tefillin is also mentioned in the first paragraph of Shema and in the second paragraph of Shema. So tefillin are mentioned 4 times in the Torah, and of course in the tefillin, the proverbial mysterious black boxes, we do have the 4 paragraphs that talk about tefillin. Shema, v'hayayim shamoa, right? Shema is in V'yaschanan, v'hayayim shamoa is in Ekev, Kadesh is in Bo, and V'hayakiviyacha is in Bo, right? These are the 4 parshios of tefillin. Of course, the word tefillin does not appear in the Torah. What does the Torah say? Ukeshartam, in all 4 places. Ukeshartam lios al yodecha. You shall tie it as a sign. Now, upon your hand, let's read it just very literally. It doesn't even say arm, it says yodecha. V'hayu letotafos, and it should be, what is totafos? Well, the English gives us the helpful translation, it shall be for phylacteries. Right? So this is an example where translations work in the opposite direction. Normally, I look at the English to understand the Hebrew. I have to. Here, I have to look at the Hebrew to understand the English. Oh, phylacteries are tefillin, right? But phylactery is Greek, actually, and it means an adornment. So the word totafot means adornments. And in fact, the Mishnah Masechah Shabbos, when it talks about different types of jewelry that a woman can wear when there's no Erev, it talks about a totefet, a plate, a decorative forehead adornment. So totefot means an adornment. It'll be an adornment. Now, it's interesting that this is one interesting case where the Karaites, we know the Karaim are still around. Not too many of them, but they are still around. And the Karaites do not accept the Torah Shebal Peh. The Karaites focus only on the biblical narrative. Because of this, by the way, the Karaim became very, very expert in Dikduk and in Tanakh, simply because that's essentially all they learned, all they studied. And what's interesting is, to digress for a moment, that is why we have commentaries like the Abarbanel, who will sometimes quote Karaite biblical interpretations, not when they contradict halacha, but just in terms of words, because the Karaim did get a great expertise in biblical interpretation. Of course, a lot of times the Abarbanel and the Ibn Ezra will quote them and argue with them, but sometimes they will even quote them with approval. In fact, there's even an amazing story, and it may be a legend, you never know about these stories, about the great Rav Hai Gaon. He was the last of the Gaonim, and many say the greatest of the Gaonim. Rav Hai Gaon, unusual name, Rav Hai Gaon. And the story goes that his yeshiva was right across the street from a monastery. And one time they're learning some difficult passage in Zechariah, And Rav Hai Gaon says to one of his Talmidim, why don't you go across the street and see how they understand it? Maybe they have a good understanding here. So the student was like paralyzed. He didn't know what to do. He just sat there with his mouth open. And Rav Hai Gaon says, what's the matter? You think you can't learn from the Goyim? He says, Chazal say, Chachma b'Goyim tamin. You can see wisdom even among the Gentiles, even though it's not Torah. And we have a famous saying, although I don't think it's from Chazal, but the Rambam brings it, which Rav Hai Gaon is before the Rambam, Kabel ha'emet mimi she'amro. Accept the truth from whatever source. So there was a tradition that Rav Hai Gaon would even talk shmooze and learning, so to speak, with the people in the monastery over biblical interpretation. But generally speaking, there are Karaim even today. Right? There's a Karaite, a synagogue and the like. And what's interesting is that Karaim wear tzitzis, at least a talit. If you walk into a Karaite synagogue, they will wear a talis. They do not wear tefillin. And the reason is because they claim, interestingly enough, that this is an allegorical pasuk. When it says, you shall tie them on your hand, and they should be an adornment between your eyes, it is referring to the teachings of the Shema, the unity of God and loving God. Your hand is symbolic of your action, and between your eyes is symbolic of your brain. And therefore, it's as if the Torah is telling me that you should internalize these ideas in your mind, and you should translate them into action. As a matter of fact, we agree with that thought, as I'll tell you in a moment. But the way the Karaites do it is, they say that they don't understand there to be a mitzvah of tefillin at all. It is all understood as internalizing these teachings. Now, the only reason we know that that's not the case is because we have an oral tradition, halacha l'Moshe misinai, that tefillin are black and tefillin are square, and you have to have the 4 parshiot. But since they don't accept the veracity of the Torah Shebaal Peh, they're actually correct. Pshuto shel mikra might not automatically tell me there's a physical mitzvah tefillin. See, this is the reason I'm bringing this up is this is an interesting example of how pshuto shel mikra is not always literal. People think, the simple meaning of the pshat is always literal, and the Karaites are always literal. This is precisely an example where the Karaite interpretation is not literal, because in contextual sense of the verse, it actually refers to that poetic, non-literal meaning. So pshat and literal are not always the same. Sometimes pshat is bedafka, not literal, and that's the Karaite position for tefillin, but we, of course, have Torah Shebaal Peh. So tzitzis they do wear, because in Bamidbar you can't get out of it. You shall tie the strings to your garment, so they're kind of stuck with that. Another thing, too, they observe the Chagim, although with different calendar, but they don't blow shofar in Rosh Hashanah. Because again, if you read the Chumash literally, the word shofar is not mentioned in connection with Rosh Hashanah. The word shofar is only mentioned by the Jubilee year, every 50 years. The only phrase that is used by Rosh Hashanah is Yom Teruah Yelochem. Now we interpret Teruah is blowing of the shofar. Yeah, we interpret that. But they say Teruah can also mean shouting, praying, singing. And therefore, they actually observe the holiday of Rosh Hashanah without shofar. Very, very interesting. But be it as it may, our Messiah, of course, is that tefillin are the proverbial black boxes that contain the 4 parshios. Now, the basic idea of tefillin, however, spiritually, is exactly, not that I want to give credit to the Karaites, but the spiritual idea of tefillin is exactly what the Karaim say. But we have to concretize it in a mitzvah, and that is, every single morning, a man who puts on tefillin is dedicating his physical strength to God, his mind, his intellect, and his emotions. That's why the tefillin is on the left hand, keneged the leiv, which is said to be the seat of emotion. Rav Avaji Yosef points out a very beautiful idea. By Kabbalah Satira, the Jewish people said, Naseh v'nishma. And the meaning of Naseh v'nishma is we agree to Hashem's commandments even before we know what they are. If they would have said Nishma v'naseh, the other way around, that would have meant what? Nishma, let's hear what you're offering us, and then we'll see if we'll do it. Naseh v'nishma is giving HaKadosh Baruch Hu a blank check. Naseh, we're going to do it. Now tell us what you want us to do. So the greatness of Naseh v'nishma is unconditional submission to the will of God. That's a wonderful thing. I don't need to know what it is. Whatever it is, I'm going to try to do it. It's a wonderful thing. Rabbi Ovadia writes, every morning, the Tefillin is an individualized Kabbalah HaTorah. Because by putting on the Tefillin of the hand, before I put on the Tefillin of the head, I am pledging my action before my cognition. You see, it's mamish, Naseh v'nishma. You put on the yad before the rosh, because that is how the Torah was accepted. And every single day, the man who puts on tefillin is accepting the Torah in that way. Naseh v'nishma. I often tell people, one needs to know, if one is not fully observant yet, that wearing tefillin is totally independent of the mitzvah of davening. So let's say a person says, I'm not ready to daven. I'm not going to daven shachris for a half an hour or 45 minutes. It's too much. I'm not going to do it. Okay, not ready yet. But you could still tell the person, put on tefillin and take it off. Put on tefillin and take it off. You have fulfilled two positive commandments, because they count as two in the 613. The mitzvah of head tefillin, of hand tefillin, the mitzvah of head tefillin. Now, it's true that it is proper to read the Shema with tefillin as well. It says, he who reads Shema in the morning without tefillin is giving false testimony, because you say ukashartam, right? You're saying there's a mitzvah of tefillin. Okay, that's fine. But if he's not ready to do that, tefillin is a mitzvah mitzad atzma. It's a separate mitzvah. And I found myself in people that tefillin is often a gateway. People ask, what's the gateway mitzvah? So some say Shabbos is a major gateway, obviously. Kashrus is a major gateway. But Shabbos and Kashrus can be very, very difficult. There's a lot of things to do on Shabbos, etc. Kashrus might be difficult for people depending on where they are. Baruch Hashem in Eretz Yisrael, it's not so difficult. But tefillin can often be a gateway. People do feel inspired. There actually is something about pledging my strength, my emotions, my mind to connect to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. It's a beautiful, beautiful thing. So, and as Rabbi Ovadia says, this is a Kabbalah HaTorah. Now, we did discuss, I don't want to repeat the whole discussion, that under the strict halacha, a woman is exempt from tefillin, precisely because it is time-bound, because we don't wear tefillin on Shabbos. But based on the normal dynamic of halacha, it should appear that a woman would be allowed to put on tefillin and even make a bracha on them according to Ashkenazim. And yet, the Ramah brings, Rav Moshe Isserles does bring, that not only is a woman exempt from tefillin, but bisman hazeh, a woman should not put on tefillin, because tefillin have special requirements regarding the guf, hygiene. If a man, for example, has diarrhea or something, he also would not put on tefillin. And since a woman has nida issues and different flows, so it was considered to be inadvisable. Now, whether that does apply when hygienic conditions change is an interesting debate, meaning it's not a cut and dried, I don't want to get in trouble here, but it is not a cut and dried rule that a woman cannot wear tefillin based on contemporary conditions. It is at least a debatable issue, but as you know yourself, the minhag still is that generally speaking, women do not. In the state, I'm not sure what's going on here, I haven't heard anything here, but in the States it's a little bit of an issue. In certain modern Orthodox co-ed community schools, co-ed high schools, where a lot of the student body might be conservative or reform homes, that occasionally girls do come in and they put on tefillin, and they're not rebelling. This is just their minhag, so to speak. And the principal is confronted with the issue, and the principal says, "Well, listen, this is the minhag of their family. Minhag, minhag. Okay, I mean it's coming from conservative reform, but it's a difficult issue. So, I'm not going to be outraged over this. I'm not going to condemn it. It is true the Ramah brings that the minhag is not to, but the Ramah gave a reason that may be less applicable today. But the one thing that I can say unequivocally, in which there's no machlokas whatsoever, is women are clearly exempt from tefillin because it's a mitzvah taseh shazman garama. Now notice that I said, this is important, that tefillin is a mitzvah taseh shazman garama because we don't wear tefillin on Shabbos or Yom Tov. Now you might ask me, well, why didn't I also add we don't wear tefillin at night? Wouldn't that also be a reason? So the answer is it's very interesting. Me'ikar hadin, we actually paskin that doraisa tefillin can be worn at night, but there's a rabbinic decree not to wear tefillin at night lest you fall asleep in them, which would be disrespectful. But me'ikar hadin, Laila is zaman tefillin, and therefore that wouldn't be the reason to exempt women. But Shabbos and Yom Tov are not zaman tefillin. So let's go back a little bit. Why is that?
Because it says miyamim yamima in the pasuk.
Well, that itself is a machlokas in the Gemara if Laila is zaman tefillin or not. The one that now there is an opinion that says Laila is not zaman tefillin based on that drasha, but we paskin not that way. We actually paskin Laila is zaman tefillah, and it's only a gezerah lest you fall asleep. Now, so why don't we wear tefillin on Shabbos? Yeah, that's right. So it says that tefillin is called a sign. V'hayu li'os al yadecha. It is a sign of our relationship with God. And the Jewish male has another sign, the Brit Milah, of their relationship with God. And the Torah says, Al pi shnayim eidim, you should always have two witnesses to affirm your identity. And Shabbos is called a sign. So therefore, it turns out that during the week, the two signs are Brit Milah and Tefillin. On Shabbos, I don't need Tefillin because I have Shabbos. Shabbos is the sign. Now, what's interesting is the Balo Itor, one of the Rishonim, says quite an amazing thing, very, very amazing thing. He says, if Chas v'Shalom, a Jew, did not have a Brit Milah, now obviously this would be for medical reasons. I mean, any Jew who doesn't have a bris intentionally is not going to worry about tefillin. I can't imagine that. But let's assume Chas v'Shalom, because of sakana, he did not have a bris milah. So that means that during the week he only has one sign, tefillin. But Nebuch, what else could he do? On Shabbos, he should wear tefillin. So at least one day a week he'll have two signs. He'll have Shabbos and he'll have tefillin, since he doesn't have bris milah. So the Balo Itor actually says a person who did not have a bris should wear tefillin even on Shabbos. Do we paskin that way? It's hard to know. This is not a hypothetical that happens very often. All I can say is that the Mishnah Berurah does not bring such a thing. So our assumption is if it wasn't brought, probably we don't paskin that way, but you don't really know. Yeah.
It seems a little strange.
I'm saying, yeah.
The not putting on tefillin on Shabbos because you already have the base Eidim, but the pasuk says
shalosh. So you're saying the diak is shalosh. If you can have three, why not have three? That's a good. That's a good question. Yeah.
Maybe as a woman, how do you understand that since you don't have those things?
Well, this is much more of a general, broad question, and the standard mahalach. Now, again, some people call it apologetic, but the standard mahalach is that a lot of the externalized manifestations of faith in God, women are in less spiritual need of because they've internalized emunah to a much greater degree. So the standard answer is that this is not something a woman's neshama needs because she's internalized the idea of emunah. Now, I know some people get angry with that, but I think in emunah, at least in particular, I think there's a real truth. Just in my own experience dealing with different people, women are very great in emunah. Remember, they didn't sin with the chet ego. They had emunah that Moshe would be coming down. They didn't sin with the meraglim. They had faith that we will be successful in Eretz Yisrael. So emunah, again, I'm not generalizing every woman, every man is this, and every woman is this. But women have excelled throughout the history of Klal Yisrael in their really undiluted emunah in HaKadosh Baruch Hu and bitachon. So it's not so rachok to say that these externalized manifestations of emunah are less necessary for somebody who internalized them in their own lives. Yeah, I'm sorry.
Two questions. One is, if you can in your schedule, take time to explain the thing about Rashi's daughter, I think it was.
Yes.
That's one thing.
Okay.
And the second thing, there are groups I know who, they wear tefillin all day, and I thought that when you wear tefillin, you have to concentrate always that it's impossible. So how is that all?
Okay, so let me talk about that a little bit. If you read the Gemara in Brachos and the like, it's very, very clear that there was a widespread practice for men to wear tefillin the whole day. I mean, they would go to work, they would be wearing tefillin. Tefillin is what a Jewish person wore. Over the years, that became less done, because you're with the non-Jews and the like. But the Vilna Gaon wanted to, himself reestablished it, and in the Zilberman Cheder system, which is following the minhagim of the Vilna Gaon, the kids, bar mitzvah boys, wear tefillin the whole day. I mean, I remember I happened to once be there right before Shabbos. It really was almost like a bunch of angels walking around. They're all dressed up in their shining white shirts, and they're still wearing tefillin until the last minute, until right before Shabbos. So they're just walking around with tefillin. A beautiful sight. Now, here is the issue, though. It is brought down that when a person wears tefillin, they're not allowed to engage in idle conversation, and they're not allowed to have levity, fool around, college rush. Now, they are allowed to go to work. I mean, they're allowed to go to work. They're allowed to cook food. They're allowed to do regular activities. In other words, they don't have to just learn or daven. They can do their regular life. But you have to be very serious and conscientious. As a result, it was thought that in later generations, most people are not able to live at that standard. So if I had, for example, a boy in yeshiva who wanted to wear tefillin all day, I can promise you the Rebbeim would discourage him from doing it. They would say, this is not what we do. We're not always on the madrega to do it, and the like. But for the greatest tzaddikim, it's a good thing. Rav Scheinberg, in our generation, Rav Pinchas Scheinberg, in addition to the 100 pairs of tzitzis that he wore, which is another issue, but maybe it's a little less known that he actually wore tefillin the whole day. And even when he was on, he had very small tefillin, so he could cover it up with his hat. Even when he was on an airplane, he had a hat, and he was wearing tefillin. So there were people, and as I say, in the Zilberman school, they even have the kids. The kids do it. I'm not sure. It's interesting. Well, do they have recess? I don't know. I'm not sure how that works out. I think there's a real problem. Now, it could be they could take it off and put it on again, meaning the way tefillin works is, even if you wear it the whole day, it doesn't mean it's on you the whole day. For example, going to the bathroom, you take it off and you make a new bracha. So it could be, it's entirely permissible. I take it off for recess. Let's have some fun in the yard, and then I'll put it on again. Meaning that's possible. You could take it off and put it on many times, and you still have the mitzvah of wearing it for a prolonged period. But it doesn't mean that you're in a straitjacket, that you're not allowed to ever have some recreational fun activity. Now with Rashi's daughters, just as I mentioned, that there is one thing is, one woman who for sure wore tefillin, because this is recorded in the Gemara, is Michal bat Shaul. It says beferish in the Gemara that Michal, the daughter of Shaul, wore tefillin. Problem is, Michal is an ambiguous precedent, so to speak, because on one hand, she was righteous. On the other hand, she was criticized because she criticized David for dancing. So it's not really clear if Michal is a legitimating precedent, or maybe it's a negative precedent, and that's why there are two texts, there are two girsos in the Gemara. Girsa number 1 says, Micha bat Shaul wore tefillin, volo michu bo chachamim. The chachamim did not protest, which may mean they allowed it or approved it. There's another girsa, Michal bat Shaul hiniach tefillin umichu bo chachamim. The chachamim did protest. You mamish have two nuschaot in the Gemara. So that's the one case we know for sure. The second case is a tradition which many historians say is not true. So I don't know. And that is that Rashi did not have sons. Rashi had daughters. Rashi's daughters were very learned. And here I think it is recorded that he learned Gemara with them. So in terms of women learning Gemara, that I think we do have a fairly clear precedent for. But the legend has it that Rashi's daughters, or at least some of them, wore tefillin. But I think most historians say that's an unsubstantiated
Google says it's
legend.
not
I didn't hear you. I didn't hear.
substantiated.
Oh, Google says. Okay, that's probably where I got it from. Okay. Yeah. I look at Rav Google also. Anyway, I think all of us regard it as our Rebbe. Okay. So you never know. Now it's interesting that just as a little aside about Rashi's daughters. One of the Masechtas in Shas, that's a very obscure Masechta a little bit, is Maseches Nedarim, that deals with vows. And Maseches Nedarim does have a commentary of Rashi, like every Maseches, but on the outer margin is a commentary of the Ran, Rabbeinu Nisam, which is much longer. And in Maseches Nedarim, unless you're doing it be'iyun, you do the Rashi. Everyone skips the Rashi. And everyone learns the Ran. The Ran is the standard commentary for Nedarim, and almost nobody, unless they're really ma'ayin and everything, almost nobody even looks. I mean, when I learned Nedarim in OUisrael for a year, we did not look at Rashi once. I don't recall even in Shir the Rebbe bringing up what was called Rashi. It's obscure, it's difficult, whatever, but I hope this is not the reason. But some say that the commentary on Nedarim was written by one of Rashi's daughters. Now, I hope that is not the reason it is not studied, but who knows? But they do say that Nedarim and Nazir, both Masechtas, where the Rashi is not studied, some attribute it to Rashi's daughters. So they were great Talmidot Chachamim. Is this in here? See, Talmid Chacham is an ambiguous word in translation. Does Talmid Chacham mean a wise student or a student of the wise? That would be, if it's a student of the wise, then even when you're talking about a woman, she Talmidah Chachamim. You still have Chachamim because you're not modifying the Talmud. You're saying she's a student. So that's a question of how you say that. And the like. Okay, so that's the idea of Shabbos. Now, Chol HaMoed, just to go over this, Shabbos and Yom Tov, of course, are both the same, no tefillin. Chol HaMoed is a huge machlokas, as you know, because on one hand, it does have some sanctity of Yom Tov, but it's not completely a Yom Tov, it's Chol HaMoed, and that is why there are different minhagim. Some minhagim wear tefillin on Chol HaMoed, some with a bracha, some without a bracha, and some minhagim don't wear tefillin at all. Chol HaMoed, the minhag of most of Eretz Yisrael, both among Ashkenazim and Sephardim, is not to wear tefillin. Chol HaMoed, but it's not universal. There are Yekis, for example, who will still wear tefillin even in Eretz Yisrael, and if that was your minhag, you're not mechuyev to discard it. But b'derech klal, many Ashkenazim, even if they wore tefillin back in the U.S. or wherever, will stop wearing tefillin Chol HaMoed. Of course, in a way, I mean, there is a logical connection here, because Chol HaMoed in Eretz Yisrael is observed very differently than Chol HaMoed back in the United States. In the United States, there's more of a Chol than there is a Moed, meaning to say, Chol HaMoed, just like they say bar mitzvah, more bar than mitzvah in America. But anyway, so in America, it's more Chol than Moed. So, it kind of makes sense. Like what? You go to work, you drive around, you do everything, but when it comes to Tefillin, I treat it like Yom Tov. I mean, listen, if you're treating Chol HaMoed like a weekday, you ought to wear Tefillin. I mean, it's only for Tefillin that all of a sudden you're saying, Kedushas Yom Tov, can't wear Tefillin. But in Eretz Yisrael, Chol HaMoed is Taka Yom Tov. I mean, in fact, sometimes it's very frustrating. You want to go shopping, you want to get something, you have some extra time. Everything's closed. This is closed and that is closed. So it's frustrating on some level, but it's good. It's good that Chol HaMoed is mamish considered to be part of the Chag. So this is not the reason why it developed this way, but in a way it makes more sense in Eretz Yisrael to treat it like a Yom Tov that you don't wear tefillin than it might be in Chutz La'aretz. Okay. Anyway, the Gemara says in Makos, if you treat Moadim with disrespect, so you lose your Olam Haba. And Rashi says in Makos, Moadim refers to Chol HaMoed, meaning it doesn't treat, like they were saying, Moadim L'Simcha. It's not referring to desecrating Yom Tov. It's referring to not treating Chol HaMoed with the requisite respect. So it's something that all of us need to be aware of. The inyanim, the kedusha of Chol HaMoed. Okay, so be it as it may, we did explain why the Yad precedes the Rosh, because of Nasa v'Nishma. But there's another interesting point about Yad and Rosh. That is, both the Tefillin of the hands and the Tefillin of the head contain the identical 4 paragraphs of Tefillin. Shema, the Ahavta, in other words, V'hayayim Shamoa, and then Kadesh, V'haya Ki Yiviyach. Right? 4 in the Yad, 4 in the Rosh. But they're written in a very different way. In the Yad, they are written on one piece of parchment. 4 paragraphs written on one big fat piece of parchment that's then rolled up and put in the box. In the Rosh, they are written in 4 separate small parchments that are inserted in 4 compartments. Right? So if you look at a Tefillin Shel Rosh, you will see 4 compartments, literally. And if you open it up, you'll see there are 4 inside compartments that insert it, right? So here, once again, following Rav Ovadia, there's an understanding of that idea as well. And that is, the Tefillin Shel Rosh represents our attempt to understand Hashem, understand the Torah. Learning by definition is sequential. I understand one idea, then I understand another idea. By definition, it has to be compartmentalized because you learn a little at a time. But the commitment to action, meaning my commitment to the Ratzon Hashem, is absolute. Meaning to say, that's not Sevenishma. I commit even before I understand, and then I attempt to understand in a gradual, sequential, organized way. It reflects the idea that I got to start with the commitments, which is total, undifferentiated, and then I sequentially try to understand a little bit at a time. Now here, this is the basis of the huge machlokes, Rashi and Rabbeinu Tam. And that is, it starts off as a machlokes about the Tefillin Shel Rosh, the Tefillin Shel Rosh. And that is the order in which the paragraphs are put in the Shel Rosh. Well, we have 4 compartments, right? So Rashi's position is you follow the order of the Torah. Now, in the order of the Torah, it would be Kadesh, V'haya Ki Yiviyach, because both of them are in Bo. Then you'd have Shema and V'hayayim Shamoa. So you're following the order of the Torah. Kadesh, and you're going from the right, but not the right of the one wearing tefillin, the right from the perspective, and as you're looking at me, so from your right to left, looking at me, Kadesh, v'haya kiviyacha, Shema, v'hayayim Shemoah, meaning order of Torah. According to Rabbeinu Tam, who is Rashi's own grandson, it goes, Kadesh v'haya kiviyacha, and then you start from the other end, Shema v'hayayim Shemoah. So the v'hayas are in the middle. V'hayayim Shemoah, v'haya kiviyacha are in the middle. Now you might say, who cares? But the point is, this is a very, very important. The Gemara has a drasha that the seder of the parshiot, the order of the parshiot, are ma'akev. They affect the kashrus of the tefillin. So if you were to wear your tefillin with the wrong order of the parshiot, the tefillin are puzzled. Which means, for Rabbeinu Tam to wear Rashi's tefillin, he would not be Yotzei. And for Rashi to wear Rabbeinu Tam's tefillin, he would not be Yotzei. So even though we don't necessarily understand logically why this is such a big issue, L'maisa, this is not just a Hidr mitzvah, or a Lechatchila, or a Chumrah, or a Minag. This actually affects the kashrus of the tefillin. So this immediately gives rise to really one of the most difficult questions in halachic history. How does such a machlokas ever develop? I mean, Rabbeinu Tam was Rashi's own grandson. And until Rabbeinu Tam, who lived in the 1100s, the tefillin that were worn were following, again, it's not even Rashi Shita, the standard practice was order of the Torah. So comes Rabbeinu Tam and essentially declares, based on his reading of Gemara, that the whole Jewish world is doing it wrong. Nobody is Yotzei tefillin. My grandfather, Rashi, has never worn tefillin in his lifetime. Huh? I mean, how do you get that? I mean, there are really a few questions, meaning, how can Rabbeinu Tam simply passel what everybody was doing? So on that, the answer is, well, Rabbeinu Tam is not the first one to invent this. If you go back in Jewish history, you will find there always were these two views. In the ancient Genizas, you find tefillin in different arrangements. There always were these two views, and they're simply arguing over which should be the halachically valid view. But even if you say that Rashi and Rabbeinu Tam are not the originators of this machlokas, okay? It's an old machlokas. But you could still ask, how did the machlokas start? I mean, tefillin was given by Hashem to Moshe Rabbeinu. Presumably, in Moshe Rabbeinu's time, he told us exactly what we're supposed to do. Now, tefillin is a mitzvah that you do every 6 days a week. So, how do you get a machlokas about that? Meaning, I understand machlokas on occasional things that don't happen that often, so people don't remember. That happens in shul all the time, Do you say avarachamim on a given Shabbos, right? That's the old story about the new rabbi that was hired by the shul. And immediately there was some question, do you say this, do you say that? And some people were yelling, say it, and some say, don't say it. So the rabbi didn't know really, because he didn't know what the shul's minhag was. So he asks an old-timer, he says, what's the minhag here? He says, the minhag here, we fight about it. I mean, this is our minhag everywhere. So when you have occasional issues, okay, there could be machlokas. People don't remember. But when you have something that's done every day, like who's the first, sofer who deviated from the practice? It's a bit of a mystery. Like how do you introduce a disunity or a nonconformity in a mitzvah that's done constantly? But nevertheless, it is brought down that Rashi and Rabbeinu Tam are not the originators of this machlokas. The machlokas goes all the way back. So, la halacha, a regular pair of tefillin is Rashi's tefillin. right? So if you buy tefillin, you're buying Rashi's tefillin. Rabbeinu Tam is special order. Most people do not wear Rabbeinu Tam's tefillin, but the Shulchan Aruch says if a person is a Yarei Shemayim, he will try to fulfill both opinions and have Rabbeinu Tam's tefillin. And as you know, it is most common among Hasidim and many Sfardim who follow this. And there are two ways of doing it. The way Hasidim do it is they wear Rashi's tefillin for most of davening till the middle of Chazaras Hashatz or whatever it is, and then they take off the Rashi and they put on Rabbeinu Tam. Right? That's how Hasidim do it. Many Sfardim, maybe you've seen this, they actually wear both tefillin at the same time. They have smaller tefillin. They'll wear a rosh side by side, and they'll wear double here. Of course, they have to have smaller batim to be able to locate everything in the right location of the arm and on the head. And they actually wear two tefillin at once. And the Gemara says beferish that mokom yesh barosh, there is a place in the head, on the head, to have two pairs of tefillin. So Rav Chaim Volozhiner, the great Talmud of the Vilna Gaon, once asked the Vilna Gaon, why didn't he wear Rabbeinu Tam's tefillin? The Vilna Gaon didn't wear Rabbeinu Tam's tefillin. And the Vilna Gaon said, well, why should I? So Rav Chaim Volozhiner said, well, there's a machlokes, Rashi and Rabbeinu Tam. You want to be yotzei all the different views of tefillin. So the Vilna Gaon said, if I wanted to be yotzei all the different views of tefillin, I would have to wear 67 pairs of tefillin. And the Vilna Gaon went through every single machlokas, not just between those two, but among all the commentators. And you want to be yotzei everybody? You're going to have 67 pairs of tefillin. And since the Vilna Gaon says, I'm not able to do that, he says, why should I only want to be yotzei Rashi and Rabbeinu Tam, which is only a single machlokas? And therefore, the Vilna Gaon only wore Rashi's tefillin. But it is a Hasidim and Sfardim do both. There are actually other arrangements as well. Shimusha Rabbah, for example, Chabad has a Messiah that the Rebbe would wear a third arrangement of tefillin that's called Shimusha Rabbah. And Chabad likes to point out that when the Frierdiker Rebbe, Rabbi Yosef Yitzchak, gave a pair of Shimusha Rabbah tefillin to Rav Menachem Mendel, that was in effect validating him to be the next Rebbe. If you're not the Rebbe, you're not. You don't wear this third pair of tefillin and the like.
What's the order of Shimusha Rabbah?
I honestly don't remember. I'll check it. I don't remember, but it is a different order. Yeah.
Forgive me. You didn't quite say where did the machlokes come from to begin with.
I didn't answer it. I don't know. All I'm saying is it didn't start with Rashi and Rabbeinu Tam. So if you look at the Talmud Yerushalmi, you will see like Rabbeinu Tam. Meaning there were proofs that go all the way back. In Genizas, if you go to the Cairo Geniza, other Genizas, Masada even, you will find tefillin in both configurations. So there was an ancient tradition that there were at least two ways the tefillin were organized. But as I say, the machlokas, Rashi and Rabbeinu Tam, is which should be the halacha. Yeah.
Maybe that's why it says totafot and not totefet.
Because of two arrangements. Again, though, I wouldn't call that a proof, because under any arrangement, it is 4 compartments. Either way, it's 4 compartments. Yeah.
I don't say this is clearly not the reason for why the machlokes is between Rashi and Rabbeinu Tam, but it seems interesting that Rashi holds a and his
here he goes with the Magya. Here he follows the chronological. Yeah, very good. I hear the horror. They do again. They tell the legends. Rashi himself wore tefillin the whole day, and the legend goes when Rabbeinu Tam, little Rabbeinu Yaakov ben Meir was a little child, on Rashi's knee, he pulled at his father's tefillin shel reish and pulled it off, just like So who knows and the like. Yeah.
What did Rambam do?
The Rambam followed Rashi. The Rambam followed Rashi's tefillin. In fact, as I say, it's a little bit of a misnomer. Just like I'll give you another example. We talk about Rashi's ksav. The special Rashi. It has nothing to do with Rashi. It's a regular font that was used in many, many Sfarim. The reason why it's called Rashi script is not because Rashi B'davka wrote it that way, but because the very first Hebrew book that was printed was Rashi on Chumash. That was the very first Hebrew book, and they used that font, so it became known as Rashi's Ksaf. So the same thing, when we talk about Rashi's Tefillin, it happens to be Rashi's opinion, but he did not originate this. He was just codifying what the standard practice had already been. So Rashi was not the inventor of this, nor was Rabbeinu Tam the inventor of his Shita. These are two very ancient traditions, and the machlokas is, how do we paskin? And as I say, I will leave it as a bit of a mystery. How did two divergent traditions emerge in that way, since tefillin is something that is daily, it's not an occasional thing. I'm sorry, someone? Oh, yeah, I'm sorry, Robert.
There's a seder to the way the parshas appear in the Tefillin Shel Yad, correct?
Yes. So
why then do we have a machlokas in Tefillin Shel Rosh?
No, I want to point out, I'm sorry, I should have made it clear. The same machlokas of the Rosh is also in the Yad, meaning to say, now here's a bit of a subtlety though, meaning according to Rabbeinu Tam, it is Shema, V'hayam Shemoah, V'haya Ki Yaviyacha, and Kadesh. Same thing. But here's the subtlety. This is going to be an amazing subtlety. Even Rabbeinu Tam is moda that the parshios have to be written in the order of the Torah, even though they're placed not in the order of the Torah. Which means, if I'm a sofer and I'm writing Tefillin Shel Yad, so according to Rashi, it's simple. I write Kadesh, V'haya Ki Yaviyacha, Shema, V'hayam Shemoah. Like Rabbeinu Tam, this is what I have to do. I write Shema, V'hayam Shemoah. I then skip the size of V'haya Ki Yaviyacha. I write Kadesh, and then I go back and I write V'haya Ki Yaviyacha. In other words, according to Rabbeinu Tam, you write one. In other words, in the Yad, it's 1, 2, 4, 3, but you have to write it 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, you get it? In other words, one, you write it 1, 2, skip 3, skip the third one, write Kadesh, and then go back. So there is a machlokas Rashi and Rabbeinu Tam in the Tefillin Shel Yad as well. Yeah.
Well, is that, I don't remember if Tefillin has the same halacha like the mezuzah. The mezuzah, you have to write it in order.
Yep.
And if you skip, you can't go back and put it there.
That's correct. It's Tefillin and mezuzah. Yeah, it's exactly the same. This is why Tefillin and mezuzah. Baruch Hashem has rachamim. Okay, Tefillin and mezuzah have to be written in order. Now that means it's almost impossible. If you have a letter in the Tefillin that's puzzle, you can't just fix the letter because you wrote it out of order because all the stuff that came afterwards was written before this letter. So that's why by Tefillin and mezuzah, it's very, depending on the psul, it's a very technical area, but generally speaking, you will not be able to fix them.
But how do you do it? How do you do it with Rabbeinu Tam? Because he's writing out of order.
No, the same thing. You wrote it in order. That's what I'm saying. Even like Rabbeinu Tam, you wrote it in order.
No, but that's the Shel Yad. So Shel Rosh, the Shel Yad.
No, even the Shel Yad, you skipped. In other words, you wrote.
Skipping considered to be not putting it out of order?
No. You just skipped it. You didn't write anything. In other words, you wrote Kadesh before V'haya Ki Yaviyacha, even though V'haya Ki Yaviyacha appears before Kadesh. Yeah. I just want to point out that Hashem has rachamim that there's no such halacha for a Sefer Torah. Because imagine the situation where every time you had a puzzle, a cracked letter in a Sefer Torah, the whole Torah could not be repaired. That would have been an enormously difficult situation. So Baruch Hashem, a Sefer Torah does not have to be written in order, and therefore a puzzle letter can be corrected without having to rewrite everything that comes after that puzzle letter. But for Tefillin and mezuzah, there is indeed a din of Kesidron, and that's even true like Rabbeinu Tam, where the placement of both the Yad and the Rosh is not Kesidron. Okay, we'll stop here. Have a good week. Have a good Chodesh.
Because